Good morning.
Hello.
That was a very serious hello, David. How are you?
We're very serious people.
Have you recovered from your road trip yesterday?
With Chris, it was a pleasure.
Excellent.
Even with his wonky hand. Wave your wonky hand to the viewer, Chris. Let them see it and look at you. All he thought he'd done was broken a finger. He's actually fractured his shoulder, his arm, his leg. He's in a bad state, aren't you, Chris?
His hand though. So I've got one hand that's good.
That's good. Is that the blessing hand though? That's the key one?
Yeah, I've got to do the funny curl, haven't I? I've quite unworked out how you're supposed to do that.
You're not allowed to.
You know, the one we're not allowed to.
You're not allowed to do that, Chris. Just keep it straight at all times. Straight down the line, as they say. Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that one.
Yeah. However, don't get above your station.
Are you going to tell our dear viewers what your road trip was about?
We went to Diocesan Synod.
And we're jumping up and down with excitement.
In Amesbury.
And it wasn't even in the Church of England.
No.
There's an irony.
The Diocesan Synod, the governance meeting of the Church of England, has to meet in a Baptist church.
Well, it's not like we have any buildings or anything.
No, it's one of those personal things that I just feels wrong.
Yeah. I did tackle the Dean as he came out by saying we could have had the Deanery Synod in the cathedral because they're not going to lose any revenue at that time of night, are they? You know.
I wouldn't think they'd lose any revenue any time of the day because all we need is one little chapel for 50 people.
I was going to say, how enormous is Diocesan Synod?
Enormous.
In Salisbury Cathedral.
It was the annual meeting as well for the Board of Finance, which is very good. But also we had the first Church Estates Commissioner came to speak to us. He was very good, actually, I thought.
He's the guy. We found it. He's the guy in charge of all of the money in the Church of England.
He is.
Wow.
Or what was it, 16 billion of it or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Gosh, how terrifying.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Which was very, very good. And we were told as well, which was fantastic news for people, that the diocese had been awarded one of these, what do they call them, grants to improve ministry and mission, and of £5.15 million.
Excellent.
Yeah, of which a lot of it's going to go to Beaminster because they're going to become a mission hub.
We've been a mission hub for years, Chris.
They're going to become a mission hub. They're going to lose their word team.
No, we're not.
And they're going to be the Beaminster hub.
No, never. It'll never happen, Chris. I can promise you. And unless I see the colour of the money first, it'll never happen either.
Watch this space.
David's on form.
Watch this space is all I'll say.
I'm used to having been promised things before and never seeing the reality of them. So until I see the colour of money, mate, you be careful.
So what you're saying is, if you get enough money, you'll let them do it.
Well, I'm thinking for the future for whoever eventually replaces me. It'll be good for them, won't it?
I didn't think you were ever going to be replaced. I thought you were here forever.
You're irreplaceable.
Thank you. Wrong on both accounts, I'm afraid. As I know from the fact that there's been a church on this site in Beaminster for best part of 2,000 years or 1,800 years.
But David,
it'll still be there after I've gone and longer. Yes,
but
Chris.
David, if I go into my church here in Loders,
yeah, yours is older.
It'll say something like 1107 Baldwin occurs.
I know.
And you're still here.
Yeah, I know. It's a frightening thought, but no. The fact that we could be an exemplar of rural ministry again in the diocese.
Some conversations sort of gently lead us into our reading on Matthew's Gospel and leadership of the church.
The problem is, you see, Chris, we can only be a hub if we can only be a hub if we see more calling being answered by people. That's the problem.
Well, we were talking a lot about callings last night. We had our pastoral skills course, our session on young people and families, and I'm really encouraged. late.
Well, you got a reading about this point, haven't you, Callie?
I have got a reading. Shall I do?
Is it from Agatha Christie or any Blyton or from Rankin or something?
Well, from somebody called Matthew.
Ah, yeah. It is
Matthew
next door.
Well.
It is next door, but one to us.
Oh, right. He's also been around for a few thousand years.
Yeah, he has. Yeah.
Shall I read?
Please.
From Matthew 16. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven."
Some of these.
Yes. Are those your church keys?
Yeah.
Oh, I like that big one.
I've got two big ones, and they're different.
And were they given to you at that moment when you were installed?
Yes.
Those particular keys.
Those particular keys. I thought it was a big bowl full of keys.
Oh, lovely.
It wasn't a symbolic key. It was a big, well, I think it was a Tupperware bowl that took me days to sort out. And I've still got my key ring labelled EAP on it, and I think one of the keys on my EAP key ring unlocks Broadoak Church.
Oh, I went to the Pioneer Gathering last Saturday at East Holme Priory that Hilary Bond owns, and she gave us the key, the enormous key to the little church there. Absolutely gorgeous key, really, really lovely. It was very nice to go into that church. Very nice to meet all those pioneers again. And
how does that relate to Peter being given the keys of the kingdom of heaven?
So we are in Petertide. We are celebrating people's callings, particularly to ordination. And for a whole number of us, maybe you two, certainly me, it's the anniversary of ordinations. I'm going back to Guildford Cathedral on Saturday, actually, for my friend's priesting, for Jane's priesting. Jane was LLM in the church where I served my curacy, and she's being priested, and I'm one of the supporting ministers, which is really, really lovely. So I'm looking forward to that. So yes, so we're thinking about callings, and that reading is one of the St. Peter and St. Paul readings for this Sunday.
It is.
And that's the moment that Jesus called Peter to lead the church. Sorry?
The first pope.
The first pope.
Or the first archbishop. And our priesting can be our own priestings can be traced all the way back, can't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's the nature of the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church all those years. But how do we do that? How are we the keys to the kingdom of heaven?
It's so important that we're encouragers, and not turning people away from the gates. We're supposed to be encouraging people in their faith and bringing people, ushering people in to the kingdom, aren't we? Obviously, it's God who draws people into the kingdom, but we can certainly open the door.
One of the things that I've done for the last 30 years. It'll be 30 years next Wednesday to the date when I was ordained as a deacon. And it's 29 years on Saturday to the date when I was ordained priest.
Mm.
And one of the things I was taught to do by my training incumbent, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, God rest his soul. And every first day of the month ever since then, I read the ordinal and the charge.
Brilliant.
So he said, you'll never forget what you were called by God to do, to be a shepherd, a lover of people.
And that bit where it says you cannot do this in your own strength.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I often remind bishops, and if you're watching Bishop Carey, I hope you're better. I always remind bishops occasionally that when I've been licensed into jobs, the job, we're told, is both yours and mine. It always seems to be mine for most of the time, but it is yours and mine. We're all called together, whenever and whoever we are. And of course, we don't stop being deacons just because we're called to be a priest or called on to be a bishop or even an archbishop. You always remain a deacon because you've been licensed into deacons' orders. And that's about serving, isn't it?
Yeah, and also that it crops up in the ordinal as well, that our calling comes out of our Christian calling, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So even before we become deacons, we're first called to be Christians. Where that calling applies to all believers. That we have that calling as believers to be. That's why it's quite interesting, the language around volunteers. We use the word volunteer a lot about those people who serve in our churches, and that's great. Of course, people are volunteers when they're giving their time, free, etc. But actually, it's a calling, isn't it? People have a calling to, whether it's to do the flowers, to set up communion, to sweep the floor, to serve coffee, whatever it is. Actually, that's part of our Christian calling. We're all called to serve. We're all called to serve each other, to serve God and to serve each other.
Mm.
It's a very important point, actually. It's we spent quite a bit of time talking about priestly callings, but actually the ultimate goal, I think, for every human being is to do what God wants them to be doing and what God's calling them to do. And God calls us to do anything and everything. And I've got a broken hand at the moment, but I remember when I was at university, I broke my leg, and when I broke my leg, it was in plaster for 6 weeks. Well, it very quickly told me that a broken leg, you've got to isolate that leg to allow it to heal, which means 2 arms along with 2 sticks or crutches have to do the job of that leg. And 2 arms and 2 crutches do not do the job of a leg as well as the leg does.
Yeah.
And it's quite important that we get into the job in church in which we flourish and that we're designed to do. If we're an arm, don't try and do the leg's job. If we're a leg, don't try and do the arm's job. And spiritually, we often get into the wrong bit. If we're called to be a pastoral person, then do it. If we're called to be a pastoral person, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to stand at the front and lead a service. If you're called just to go and visit your neighbour and sit with them whilst they're dying, then do it. And that is God's work for you. And it's really important that we get to do what God wants us to do. And maybe, Peter and Paul were very different people. And if you look at Paul, we've talked about Peter here. If you look at Paul on the road to Damascus, he was out to persecute all the Christians he could find. And Jesus met him and blinded him and said, "Come and follow me." And Paul did. And I think that was another thing that I can't remember who told me now. I think it was an archdeacon when I started exploring, when I became a reader. He actually said, don't forget, God qualifies the called. He doesn't call the qualified. So if we don't, just because we think we can't do something, if that's what we're called to do, God will give us the training and the skills to do it, rather than us thinking, oh, I'm really good at this, therefore that's what God wants me to do. So that's another lesson. If you feel called, go and talk to somebody and get yourself qualified for it.
There's lots in what you just said. There's the fact that you talked about your leg and your leg being out of action, and now you've got your hand, if not your arm, out of action. There is something about resting and not running around trying to be that leg if you can't be that leg for a season. We that's why we need the whole of the body. And the other point, I'm fascinated. You're talking about Peter and Paul. Isn't it interesting that Jesus called Peter to be the rock, not Paul? I mean, obviously, Jesus and Paul and the extent to which they overlapped is one major point there. But theoretically, if Paul had been around in Jesus, when Jesus was doing his ministry, what would the church have been like if it had been Paul? Paul, who was put in charge of the church rather than Peter. What is it about Peter? What qualities did Peter have that,
I think the qualities that he had were what a lot of people have. He was just human. And he let Jesus down, but was always able to acknowledge his weakness and his fallibility, etc. And I often wonder, who would Jesus have turned to next if Peter had said, "Thanks, mate, I don't want that job, give it to somebody else"? Who would have been next in line?
You've got the story of Moses and Aaron, and Moses going, "Oh, I'm not up to it. I can't be a mouthpiece," and God saying, "Okay, well, we'll have Aaron to speak for you."
You see, I think, speaking out of turn, the church has lost the plot in many ways, because people like us who felt called by God to a spiritual calling, and I'll presume without assuming either of you, that's really where you started off with a spiritual sense of wanting to serve God, have become chief administrative officers of an organisation. But I never felt called to be a spiritual, to be a chief administrative officer. I always have felt called to be the spiritual director of the people that I serve, because that's what it's about. We serve the communities, don't we, that we're part of. And my service is to be able to direct them spiritually, to know Jesus for themselves. Making Jesus known. That's what it's about. That's what I felt called to do, and to help people to know Jesus for their lives. So their lives would be changed in turn, in the same way that my life was changed when Jesus decided to make a call on me. And all the tussles that I had, and I'm sure you did, about whether or not you felt that call was right or wrong.
But some of that administrative stuff, at first glance, it looks like really boring, tedious administrative rubbish that gets in the way of us exercising our pastoral care and exercising our calling. But actually, getting that administrative stuff right enables the calling. So, look at the pastoral skills thing that we're running at the moment, course that we're running at the moment. Actually, if we can get in place, some gentle systems in the background to make sure that we are covering the ground that we want to cover, to ensure that people are visited, that we notice when people aren't in our churches. We need a bit of administration around it, because, frankly, I can't be in 6 places at once. I won't necessarily, and especially if we're moving around our churches, are we going to notice when Mrs. Smith isn't in church for a few weeks? We need some kind of a basic system, so that, somebody actually says, Mrs. Smith hasn't been in church for a few weeks, we'll follow up. And and I think that matters.
And that is spiritual as opposed to administrative, isn't it? Though, because what you're
The
saying
administrative bit backs that up. And we had a lovely talk on buildings yesterday. Dan Crook came to speak to us about faculties. How boring can faculties be in that faculty system? Unbelievably boring when you go into the law on it. But actually, it's all about preserving our beautiful buildings for the heritage that they're not just for the heritage that they are, but for the presence that they represent in our communities, the presence of God and the presence of love of neighbour and community. And actually they matter, and all that stuff matters, so that they don't become full of tat and, dilapidated. And
David's alluding to, though, is sometimes we end up spending so long just on this admin that the work itself just doesn't get done.
I think
we don't do the pastoral work.
I mean, all the things you said, Callie, I know. Believe me,
I'm sure you do.
Of the importance of it. Add to that hours and hours of safeguarding. Add to that hours and hours of being a governor at a school or whatever it may be. And whilst all that is part of a calling, and many other people are called from our churches to those things as well, because of the hours are spent by many people, not just
absolutely, which is why we need.
And yes, it's good to have some kind of organisation that can absorb it and whatever. What if we're not careful? We're not doing it. We're not doing the making Jesus known, because we'll find reasons as to why that was important to do. But the real witness is to how do we spend the time being called, and I think what you've highlighted is the fact that there are many callings, many people answer them, and it is the eye alone isn't any good. You need the hand, or you need the foot, or the body, and etc. to all be one, and we're all called to serve. And it's recognising our calling and recognising that each is valid in God's sight, regardless of what it is you feel called to, and not to be disappointed if it isn't to some kind of ministerial role or whatever, because serving God in any capacity is valid, is important, and is rewarded by God with his love and care. So, yeah.
And Chris's point about, let the leg be a leg and let the arm be an arm, and people serving, to their strengths, as it were.
Absolutely. So there we are. So calling is important. You'll be in Guildford. You won't be in Exeter, Chris, I presume, any time over the ordination retreats, will you?
They're all Michaelmas ordinations, so that's September.
Well, for you. I shan't be in Lichfield, which is where I was ordained. And
do pray for those deacons and priests sitting out on their journey to ordination, and prayers particularly for my friend Jane. She's going to
and also pray for those who have a major role in that calling. We can always think of somebody who's influential in our spiritual growth and direction. And, and they're important people who then take on that calling and help it to be discerned, because the discernment process is very important and needs acknowledging. And then, of course, all those, including our own wonderful Joe, as part of the educational system that helps to educate and bring people to ordination, all the colleges that are around. Some, of course, more important than others. Would you agree, Chris?
Don't think some roles are more important than others.
Colleges,
Chris, colleges. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, colleges.
Yeah.
And
sorry, Callie.
The diocesan, thank you. We've had a lot of help from Venetia and from Karen Hutchinson, and the diocesan support that we need, frankly, to do our jobs.
Yeah, good.
And there's even, the odd rural dean who's probably quite useful.
Yeah, probably. If you find one, let me know, and that'd be good. I'll go and speak to them. That'd be good.
Well, there's less in this diocese now than there was.
Yes, Yeah, and we also learned last night, didn't we, that we are the cause of the problems in the Church of England, Chris?
What, rural deans?
No,
Or
clergy.
Chris's and David's? Oh, clergy. Right.
All clergy, yeah. We're just a
right.
financial burden that drains the state
Apparently.
and not
There you are.
responsible for any growth.
Yeah, think on that, dear viewer. Are clergy a financial burden that don't lead to any growth? Write all your answers to me and I'll submit them to the bishop in due course. I'm sure you'd like to.
You make a good post box, do you, David?
I'm more than happy to be a conduit for the for the millions of letters I'm going to receive or emails that I shall receive. There we are. Right, well, it's been lovely to see you. It's time to go. We'll be back again hopefully next week. And oh no, it's overkill. We didn't do the weather forecast today, Chris. You forgot the weather forecast at the beginning. What's it like in Loders?
Well, last night it was very foggy at the top of the hill from Beaminster.
It was. It's been raining this morning.
We've had rain.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. It's rather refreshing in Bridport. I'm pleased it's rained.
Bridport is always refreshing, Callie. You should know.
Yes.
That.
Oh, and talking of Bridport, the Flower and Quilts Festival in St Mary's this weekend promises to be utterly glorious. So I do recommend it. If you're watching this before Peter and Paul weekend, then come on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday to St Mary's Bridport for a feast of colour.
Yeah, and of course today the Beaminster Festival take over the church in Beaminster for the next 10 days. It'll be transformed into a music auditorium of delight. So on Sunday, Joe and I will be sharing our service together. We'll be stood up on a stage, a bit like the Pope in the Vatican, above everybody.
I hope you'll be duly robed.
Yeah. We'll be duly something or other. So there we are. Anyway, dear viewer, good to see you. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye. God bless.